It's the Bird Emergency, the podcast, the show, where we talk about the endangered species, the birds of the world that are barely hanging on and that have some pretty special and impressive people who are helping them to do just that. And today, it's my pleasure to speak to someone who I've been wanting to meet for a number of years, but a whole lot of things have got in the way and it's never happened, but we've managed to tee it up over the internet today. It's Indira Lacerna Widmann. And Indira is the Chief Operations Officer of the Katala Foundation in the Philippines, on the island of Palawan in the Philippines. But Indira is not just that. She's a conservation scientist in her own right and was a mass communications graduate. So that comes into very much good standing to do the job she's doing. And we will be talking particularly about the Philippine cockatoo, or you might see it listed as the red-vented cockatoo, critically endangered. And Indira, thanks for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Grant. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. My God, as I told you earlier, I'm a bit nervous. I'm so excited. I don't know what is the format, but the excitement is just enough for me to really start it on. Yeah. So yeah, I'm happy to be able to join you this afternoon and this morning. I don't know whatever time it is all over the world, but it's afternoon here in Palawan, Philippines. And yes, I'm so happy that finally we got in touch with each other, and hopefully physically we can see each other soon after this COVID thing.
Now, let's talk first about the foundation. Tell me how the foundation got started, what your initial aims were, and where exactly you are located, because the Philippines is 7,000 islands. So tell us about your home base there.
Okay, so if we talk about the Katala Foundation, this is a non-government, non-profit organization, and it's named after the local name of the Philippine Cockatoo. Hence, it's called the Katala Foundation. So Katala is the local name of the Philippine Cockatoo, and rightly so, because this is our pilot project of the foundation. Actually, we were just a group of six, I think, at the very start in 1998 when we started this program. And then by that time, we were not yet formally organized as a foundation. It took us until 2001 when we registered as a full legal organization, registered at the Securities and Exchange Commission. So before that, we were just a group of passionate people who really saw the Philippine cockatoo, and it was listed as critically endangered already. So that's just one step before getting extinct in the wild. Yeah. So that's why when the indigenous people from part of Palawan reported to us that there is still a good, viable population remaining in a small island, we started to put up this conservation program. But yes, you were asking which part of the Philippines are we? It's just not only 7,100 islands, it's more than that, Grant. So, but you cannot miss Palawan. We are in the southwesternmost part of the Philippines. It's the only elongated, long, narrow island in the southwest near the very contentious West Philippine Sea right now. So that's Palawan. That's where it's even biogeographically different from the oceanic Philippines. So that's how important Palawan is.
And if you are wanting to get an idea, if you can think of the globe, or you think of Southeast Asia and Indonesia, the western coast of Borneo, Kalimantan, if you draw a straight line along the coast of Kalimantan, it basically would then run directly into Palawan. And if you kept that line going straight, then it would run into Manila. So that's to place it pretty much where it is. It's also Ho Chi Minh City is about level with with Palawan in terms of, what do we say? That's longitude, isn't it? No.
Yeah, it's
So,
actually, it's right. So that they're from Kalimantan. Well, I don't know if it's easier to find Kalimantan, but maybe Borneo is really the thing that goes into the head, but Kalimantan is quite difficult to find.
yeah. Well, I think a lot of birders, a lot of bird people are familiar with where Borneo is because it's on a lot of people's bucket list, somewhere that they would love to travel.
Yeah.
Indira, where else in the Philippines can you still see in the wild the Philippine cockatoo?
Okay, so the Philippine cockatoo, as according to our research, is a lowland forest specialist. So meaning to say, we don't have to go to the Sierra Madres where the high elevation forests, but we go to really where good lowland forests are remaining. And in the Philippines, we have that in Bohol, the island of Bohol, and then we have in Luzon, in the big island of Luzon. It's only found in the southernmost part of Luzon in an island called Polilio Groups of Island. So this is the farthest in Luzon that we are there, and the cockatoos are there. And then in the Visayas, we have at present. So we have in Samar, a very minimal number. Our last survey was just between 2 to 4 in the mainland Samar, but in the islands of Homonhon, we have still a good number of cockatoos in Homonhon Island in Samar, and then in Bohol, and of course, the biggest share of it is in Sulu. No? So in Sulu, a very interesting Sulu group of islands, and in Tawi-Tawi, we have a good number of cockatoos there.
Sulu is a very interesting case at the moment because there is an indigenous insurgent. Well, it's called an insurgency, but I'm sure if we talk to the indigenous people, they would probably say, we're not the insurgents. But there is an armed conflict, which makes it very difficult for anybody wanting to do any research or management work to assess that population. And there's a whole lot of other really rare birds who are hanging on in Sulu. Hopefully one day that will all get resolved and perhaps some really good management programs can take place involving the indigenous people of the area and all of those birds. My favourite, the Sulu bleeding heart pigeon, will hang on. What's the best population estimate you have of wild birds left?
For the Philippine cockatoo, our recent population estimate is between 820 to 1,280 individuals. And up to 86 or 90% of that global population could be found in the island province of. Hence, our concentration, the concentration of our work is really here in this province.
You are undertaking captive breeding, aren't you?
No, we are really doing in situ conservation, meaning in the wild. Well, we have a center. We have a center developed in one of our project sites, but we are still learning a lot about captive breeding. Grant, there is also a very big problem on captive breeding of the Philippine cockatoo. No, I think you are aware of this aggression of the male killing the females. But this we haven't observed in the wild at all. So there is no aggression of males against females in the wild. And the in situ conservation is quite doing well. So that's what we are promoting, that if there are existing populations and viable populations that we can work on, then we should develop on that.
So I've been following the articles on the foundation website, and a lot of them talk about birds being released. Does that mean if you're not doing any captive breeding, where do those birds come from that are being released to other islands? And because as I understand it, you're trying to maintain the genetic diversity of those smaller populations by releasing birds from other regions into those populations.
Exactly. So this is what we call supplementation of the natural population. So there are the birds, the source of the birds for release are those from confiscation or they are rescued birds, rescued in the times of long dry spell, for example, if there is El Nino, for example, in years 2015, 2010, and even 2017 and 2016, we have to rescue hatchlings. Every year, we are monitoring each nest tree. No? So we are monitoring each nest tree. So we monitor, we climb the trees, and then we check whether the hatchlings have food in their crop. And if they are not fed and if they are starved, we have to rescue them. And in our rescue center, we are selecting birds whether they are fit for release back to the wild, and those confiscation, for example, confiscated birds, sometimes they are so tamed already that they are not anymore fit for release. So they stay at the center for education purposes. So that's why our rescue is very important, especially that we want really to supplement the natural cockatoo population. For example, in one island in the north of Palawan, we have a project site far north called Dumaran Island. When we started in 2003, Grant, we have a very small population of less than 20 when we started there. And we realized that the population was even aged already. So sometimes we kid it as menopausal birds. So they were not really breeding very well. Plus the fact that this island is so fragmented, no? So meaning the forests are really small patches even. So we have two small cockatoo reserves established there, and these two, one is even just like 60 hectares. It's really very small patches, but still they persistently survive. So what we do, what we have rescued from other sites or confiscated from the government, because we are the agency, we are the organization that whenever government confiscates the Philippine cockatoo, it is turned over to us for proper treatment and handling. So we check whether this is good for release. So that's where we get our releases. And I don't know if I'm too talkative, or I don't know if you have read about gold.
I have. I was going to reference gold, but let's talk about gold in a minute, because
Sure.
you just said that the government confiscates cockatoos. Now, what we need to talk about are the major threats to the Philippine cockatoo. And apart from the really rapid habitat loss, which is forestry and agriculture and just urban development is encroaching on those lowland forests. The other thing, which has been a real problem for the bird, is illegal trapping and keeping for pets.
Yes, I agree. And if we will put that in a cloud presentation of the threats of the cockatoo, while there is a big cloud for the lowland forest destruction, poaching is for the pet trade is also the second biggest threat. And in the past, this poaching, this illegal wildlife trade would supply to international demand. But for the past 10 years or so, this has been limited to domestic demand. And that's really very frustrating for us, no? But we are working on it. And our strategy that we think is very effective until now is converting poachers to become the wildlife wardens, we call them. So this is our key strategy, Grant.
Tell us how you do that. How do you convert a poacher into a protector?
It's very difficult, no? I mean, it's a long process of building trust and confidence. That's most important. And there are places here in Palawan where the poaching is territorial. When I say territorial, the nest tree is even carved with the name of the poacher. So it's really owned by certain person, by a certain poacher. And most of the poachers belong to the most marginalized sector of the community. And these are members of the indigenous peoples, not the tribal community, for which they think they only get it for for simple needs. In fact, in the past, we interviewed them and they said it's just to exchange for medicines, sometimes for food, for a favor. And then only when this big scale trade, wildlife trade in the 80s and late 70s, that really in the 80s, that it really went out to the market using middlemen and everything. So with the wildlife poachers grant, it was not a sweet 3-year thing, no? It's really long term because their idea is also that NGOs would be there just for 2 years or so, and then they leave you after they get anything they get. So this is really building their trust, and we provided them with alternative livelihood, even with small incentives as wildlife wardens only for the breeding season, meaning that's 6 months a year, January to June, for example. And then after that, they go back to their farming and fishing activities, the usual stuff. Then it already helps them in very big ways. No, it started with that. And then eventually, the local government units, the local municipality where we are working with, are also participating and owning the project and appropriating funds every year. But for now, it's not the Katala Foundation anymore that's paying their incentives monthly, and not only for the breeding season but for the whole year. So it's really now being ironed out, and it's already part of the annual investment plan of the municipality to provide a yearly appropriation for the wardens. So the wardens see their value also. Second is that, so first you immediately what do you call that, remove the threat of poaching. Because imagine in 1998 when we started that one, on the small island of Rasa in Nara, south of Puerto Princesa, the capital of Palawan. When we started that in 1999, we immediately have a successful breeding season because we got all the poachers on the island to be with us. So we removed the second biggest threat of the cockatoo. Then you provide a stable income, a more stable income, not seasonal income for the poachers. And third, Grant, very important also, is because they are providing us valuable knowledge and skills. As a member of the indigenous people, a poacher himself, that, when this nest tree is occupied, when is the right time to check the bird, which trees are really occupied, which trees are preferred by the birds, what do you do when the birds have mites, what do you do, what do you feed, all these things. These are knowledge that you get from the indigenous peoples, and then you mix that with your scientific knowledge also, and everything works well. So all of these things, mix all these three things, these three factors, now you develop that pride among them. Pride now, not because they are poachers, but that they are now in the right side of the law. Isn't that amazing?
That is, and I'm quite familiar with the Philippines, but to help listeners understand how little it takes from a Western perspective, what approximately is the monthly income, the allowance that the municipality is now paying to a poacher?
Okay, so now they are earning, I'll say, how would I translate that in, let's say, 9 to 10,000 pesos per month.
Okay, 9 to 10,000 pesos per month.
Yeah.
So we're looking at 250, 260 Australian dollars. So that is how little, from the point of view of a Westerner, how little it takes to do really successful conservation when poaching and trapping, because that's what it takes in these far-flung areas away from the city. That's what it takes to feed a family.
Exactly, Grant. So it's about 270 Australian dollars or so, right? So at that small amount, you already can help a family really survive the whole year, yeah. And we have different living standards. I mean the living costs here in the Philippines. So I think whatever little amount yet stable at that you can have is very much appreciated and valued if you compare it to poaching just for 50 pesos or 100 pesos or 250 for a hatchling, and you aren't even sure whether it will survive in your hands for the days that you will take care of it, and then give that to the middleman, and the middleman is the one earning much much more than the real poacher. So it's really very rewarding. I think that's why I want really to share the cooperation of the municipal government. No, this is important because while the Foundation is an NGO looking for funds to make the operations be ongoing and for a long time, like over the past 20 years we have been into this work. It's also very important to show from funders all over the world that there is that commitment from the local community. So this is really what makes it, and there is the tangible results of the study and of the conservation work, and there is a community working with it, and the local government pouring in money in it. So this is not so difficult anymore to look for funds.
It's a really good story. Now, before we talk about gold, I want to talk a bit more about the bird. You mentioned that they can be very aggressive in captivity. Now, you are familiar with many of our Australian parrots, cockatoos.
Yeah.
You've been here. You've been birding here. Some of our birding folk in Melbourne have taken you around. I would like you to tell the audience who might be familiar with the galah or the little corella or the sulphur-crested cockatoo, which one of those is most like the Philippine cockatoo?
Yeah. Oh my God. Before I do that, I think I have to share really my visit in Australia. And when I saw the cockatoos just on the ground, I was really right on my belly, very near on my belly with my camera with a slender billed cockatoo in Melbourne. And I was just jaw dropping. I couldn't imagine myself. This is a relative of my Philippine cockatoo. So it's the corellas, no? The corellas, they share like our Philippine cockatoo, the helmet crest, unlike the other cockatoos, which are like a fan crest. So the corellas of Melbourne are our relatives of our Philippine cockatoo. And the size is just like about the size of a domestic pigeon, like a rock dove, no? So it's a little bit smaller than your corellas, of course. And overall, it's white, like other cockatoos.
With a red vent and then yellow, the inner feathers on the tail.
I didn't want to continue it because I know you wanted to. Yeah, the very distinct coloration of our Philippine cockatoo is the red vent, no? So this is the orange reddish part of the vent of the cockatoo, and there are yellow tinges in the wings, in the crest, and some in the head, but overall it's white and then this red vents, very elegant.
And that lemon wash, that yellow wash that you were describing, that's often present on some of our sulphur-crested cockatoos. And even though your cockatoo is a little bit smaller than a galah, it's got that big, hefty bill of the sulphur-crested cockatoo rather than the little bill of the corella. So it's you can imagine that when they are aggressive and they're in close quarters to each other, they could do a lot of damage to each other.
Yeah, they're very aggressive and then also very noisy. The raucous calls, my God. I would like to share with you the stories when we have to rescue small ones, and it's really like babies when you have to wake up every 4 hours to feed, and this raucous calls even when they're babies begging for food. My God. So I don't know why people really like keeping cockatoos.
Well, they've got personality. I think that's why. Now, tell us about Gold. Gold was a bird that you released on Dumaran Island. Now, she was obviously able to cope with any aggressive male? Because she was quite successful. So tell us the story of Gold.
So gold really was our success story, you know. We know in the books and in some literature that the breeding age of the cockatoo is 4 years. And you know, Gold was born, was hatched in 2006 on Dumaran Island. And then it was El Nino. This was really a long, dry spell. And she was starving among 5 other birds from Dumaran Island. So we, the management, decided, and the people on the ground, the warden said, no, we have to rescue them. There is no other chance. So we rescued Gold along with others, and then we rescued and brought to our center. And then in that center, we know that these birds are meant for release, you know, for release back into the wild. So they are treated separately. For example, when they are fed, our keeper must be silent, not talking. And sometimes there was a time when they have to dress up like cockatoos also, so that it won't really be imprinted, not imprinted. You know, cockatoos are very intelligent, Grant, you know that. So they have really, and this is very strangely very fast on them, fast learner, that they can learn from voices and they can imitate. So that's what we did. And then after that, after weaning from baby food to real natural foods, we wean them, they are brought to our soft release aviary, meaning so that they can practice their muscle flights, their flight muscles rather, and then they can practice flying. And then after 4 months or so, we brought him back to Dumaran Island, Grant. And then in the area there, in our small cockatoo reserve within the critical habitat of Dumaran Island, we created a pre-release aviary, quite big enough for them to really practice flying. And we also trained them to avoid predators. No? So we have like a mock predation, like a white-bellied sea eagle in wood, made up of wood, and then we just fly it over the pre-release aviary, and then you can see immediately their reaction. But of course, we have to be very careful in all these things. So to cut it short, after 4 years, 2020, it's not only that she successfully integrated in the wild population, but she was able to find a mate and breed on the island and had one successful fledgling last year. So that was really the best story in the world, because I don't know how you can imagine the happiness we have when you release, you save, you rescue, and then you release, and then once it's released, it's a matter whether they will be accepted by the population in the wild, and then will they be integrated well, and then suddenly there was this nest tree that was occupied, and then we documented because of her leg band, which was gold in color, and we know because there are different colors every year, so we know that it was really her, and it was a happy moment.
You've got to celebrate those wins. It's really important that you do that. Now, when you do rescue a nestling from, for instance, a fairly remote island like Dumaran, and you bring them back to your centre, which is in the capital of Palawan. No, is it on Rasa?
It's on Nara. It's on Nara. That's about 96 kilometers south of Puerto Princesa.
Okay, so it's quite a way down. When you bring them back to the centre, do you try and keep them separated? And when they're released, are they all released back to where they were brought from? And do you try and release them like as a pair or a group if possible?
When we rescue them, there are 5 of them, for example, they are really all together in a transport box. So you hire a van, a shuttle for that, because you don't want to go into public utilities. So it's all taken care of, and there is even an incubator that we carry also in case, and everything is ready until we reach the center. And in the center, they are also grouped together where they are coming from, but when we reintroduce them back to the wild, we choose Dumaran because, as again, this is the area where the existing remnant population are aged already and they need to be supplemented. So this is why we choose Dumaran. And in the pre-release aviary, you already can see who are pairing each other or not or what. So you try to group them already. Who has the aggression? Whose male is so aggressive to which bird? So you isolate the other. We have in our pre-release aviary there is an isolation cage also where we can keep those very aggressive ones from the rest of the group and then try to reintegrate them slowly and slowly until they really. And during the release, we do it in batches also. So we start with the ones with it all depends upon the performance of the birds at the pre-release aviary because they will still have to climatize themselves, yeah, to the new environment, back to the new environment to check whether they know the foods, they know the plants. So we have to slowly open, and then only release a pair. Normally, we don't release in one only, normally pairs or even groups when we have a big group. So, and then we still keep the latch open so that when they decide to come back, they still could come back. And then all the wardens are distributed all over the release site to check whether, at a vantage point, to check whether they have fed or not, or what is the problem or anything until we really cannot see them anymore in the release site. So it's a process. It's a process.
I wonder how secure the habitat is on Dumaran Island.
This is a protected area. So we started with our two cockatoo reserves, which are very small, but now the municipality has already created a bigger area of 1,600 hectares, which tries to connect the two small cockatoo reserves, so which we call now the Dumaran Island Critical Habitat, and it's already proclaimed by the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development. This is the national agency here taking care of all the biodiversity of Palawan. And then why we say it's secured? Simply because we have our wardens and we also have cooperated with the law enforcement agency of the municipality itself. So, but what is very critical, Grant, that I really would like to tell everyone is the continuing education and the awareness of the people of Dumaran. Yeah. That is very important for any release. And we think it's really important because whenever since the people in Dumaran already knew about the Philippine Cockatoo Conservation Program, and they are made aware that there is a release going on, and they are made aware of the status of the Philippine cockatoo, they have been very supportive. And when they spot the released birds in their areas, they know that they are not supposed to feed the birds. Instead, they have to shoo the birds away. Yeah, so we taught them all these things and they immediately report. Of course, there were cases in the past when we released that they have reported that, oh, it's very near already. It's really going into our houses and already inside and something like that. But they are very quick to report. So we are again picking them up and then putting them back in the pre-release aviary and then goes back again the processes and everything. So it's time consuming, but when you have gold as a success story, it all pays off.
Is tourism, like bird tourism, going to be important, do you think, in the future for the Philippine cockatoo, particularly raising awareness and potentially bringing money into the local economy to make the bird more important to just everyday people?
Yeah, I think so. It will contribute to they call ecotourism, especially Palawan voted as an eco destination, right? So and the Philippine cockatoo with our new expansion in the Puerto Princesa area. Now we work within the Iwahig prison farm. So I don't know if you've read about that, but we work within Puerto Princesa.
We're going to talk about that program shortly because that is really innovative. I just want to first before we talk about the education and development you've been doing with the prisoner population in the local area, can we talk about the wardens? How many do you have, and what skills does a warden need to be a really good Philippine cockatoo warden?
Before I answer that, I'd like to say about education, about tourism, that what we more promote, because the Philippine cockatoo is easy to find, is it's really conservation tourism, to tell the story of the transformation of the poachers to become wildlife wardens. So we make it sure that there is an interaction of the visitor with our wildlife wardens, because that's the most important story for us, even if you find the birds. So going back to what makes it a good wildlife warden, of course you have to be a poacher. I mean the poaching component, because this is what we are trying to address, no, the poaching problem. So we would like to offer you a more stable income than poaching. So join us and be with us and be with the law and not against the law. So you have to have this, you were a poacher at least. But other than that, we have wardens that are not poachers as well. They were just part of the system. For example, they were relatives of the poacher, or they are informants of who is the middleman. So, or they are forest users, they are just cutting trees and everything just for a living. So they are also they are also contributing to the threats of the Philippine cockatoo. So whoever who has a stake that contributes to the dwindling population and the habitats of the Philippine cockatoo could be a potential wildlife wardens. And when you become a wildlife warden, you are trained. You are not left as with your skills. And I was talking about skills grant. I forgot to mention that when they have shared their knowledge of indigenous knowledge about and traditional knowledge about the cockatoo, they are also sharing with us their specific skills, particularly on climbing tall trees. The Philippine cockatoos occupy cavities of in some of our project sites. My God, the trees are like 80 meters high. And they know how to climb these trees without harnesses or everything. Because when you let them use a harness, the more you get to see them with all these things when they are not used to it, and they are used to their traditional way of climbing using rattan or just a rope, or really this vine that they use just to climb the trees. So there are skills and your knowledge and your connection, then you are really a good potential wildlife warden for us.
Now, let's talk about the prisoner program. This is really innovative. So take us right through how it, who came up with the idea, and then how did you get permission to do it?
Yeah, we've been actually doing already research in this is a 26,000 hectare of lowland forest within the heart of is the Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm. And it's really superb. It belongs to the Victoria Anipangan mountain range. And it's really good, lush lowland forest. And we've done surveys already in the past together with the prisoners, that they have found cockatoos there, and they were the ones showing us, because at that time, Grant, the prison was really very free, meaning there are no cells. Yeah, prisoners just go around and within, even outside the facility, because they plant rice. They are part of the planting rice in their vast agricultural area. And then they also go to the forest. Some even went into poaching. That's why they can show us the nest trees. That's why we know where they are, because they're the ones who also showed us. And not only the prisoners, but also the ex-convicts that have decided to stay already here in Palawan because they fell in love with Palawan. And then it's easy life here. If you only work hard, then there is everything you need. And there's a vast land that you can use. So they, both prisoners and both the ex-convicts, we are tapping them to be able to reach out to these nest trees. So only when we had that research, and then finally we entered into a memorandum of agreement with them that we wanted to formalize the cooperation and that we wanted to help also the transformation of the prisoners and that they could be readied before, because we are not also working on with high, really the red ones, the high prisoners.
Yeah.
So there are three classifications. There's the minimum, medium, and the hard ones. So we are mostly working on the minimum prisoners, the PDLs. We call them the persons deprived of liberty. So they are in brown shirts, and these are the ones really roaming around freely. They're just roaming around freely. So they are the ones we are training to become bird watchers, or they are the ones monitoring for us how many cockatoos are roosting in this area. They are the ones telling us what is the phenology status of the plants that are eaten by the cockatoos. So they tell us whether it's fruiting, shredding leaves, or whatever. So these are the engagements we have with them. So it's very nice. And of course the education, because you have to talk to all these 400 plus sometimes in one occasion. I will be around 400 brown shirt men, all men, and in the middle is a very small lady talking about the conservation of birds. And sometimes the guard will shout, "Are you still there? Are you okay?" Of course. And I feel very safe and really rewarding not to be among them, these people, and they're interested and they are eager to learn, and they were so shocked that this is only in the Philippines and things, comments like that. And really, Grant, I wanted to share that there are even some PDLs who would ask you if you have spare books because he is interested in reading about history. So you don't only develop them into becoming really open and talking about themselves, but also trying to help what their needs are. I think the important thing is that you are able to talk to them as real persons and value whatever they have left that they have. Yeah.
I think it's an extraordinary program, especially on the scale, as you just indicated, that sometimes you're talking to 400 at a time. It's one of the most imaginative citizen science projects that I think I've ever come across, because it's a ready pool of labour without needing to force anyone to do anything. It's a volunteer force. They're interested. There's a reward in it for them. And how long has it been going now?
Oh, we started since 2000, if I'm not mistaken, 2010 with our surveys there. And we formalized everything in 2015 or so. And then now we run a tree nursery of native trees that are all run by prisoners. So they are all maintained by PDLs, by persons deprived of liberty. And they collect the seeds, they grow them, they germinate them until they are ready. And the prison farm is also using it for its reforestation programs. And we offer it also for other barangays or villages in Puerto Princesa who wants to avail of free trees that are plant food and nest providing for birds, not only for Philippine cockatoo. So it's really very specialized indigenous tree species nurseries that is completely run by all the persons deprived of liberty. And Grant, it's also important to mention that the superintendents are very important here. Their role, their leadership, to be able to encourage everyone, the staff, the management. There was a time when we had a tree planting of 3,000 trees involving the PDLs and also the staff. So that was really a quite big morning, and everyone was helping, and the media was also talking about it because it was a very big affair for them to do these things. So tree planting is done every year by both staff and the prisoners, and even with the participation of other civic organizations in Puerto. So we are really growing very well in that area.
It's an astonishingly successful community program, and I think it's fabulous. Now, you didn't tell me whose idea was it? Was it your idea?
Oh, it's an idea of everyone. No person. But of course, Peter and I are really starting with all the surveys, and then it's working with the prison farm and penal colony. It's not only working with this kind of men in uniform, but we are also working with military
Oh,
men, no? Because
yeah.
that has also to come close with that. Yeah. So we have to coordinate with all the uniformed men also. So the Western Command of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, we also have good working relations and even a good understanding with them. And then they are part of our work prison farm also. So it's really a product of everyone. Nah? So we started with surveys, and then the superintendents are very interested. I want to mention that sometimes when we go on surveys, we are given guides from the prison farm, no? And then when we are in the forest or they're in the mountains already, we sometimes have a sweet talk, and then over lunch, and then we ask them, so what was your crime, like that? And then one would say, oh, I was selling lots that never existed. And then the other one would say, oh, I killed somebody. And then the other one would say, you'd rather not want to know, ma'am. So really, really nice. And it's just a candid moment with people who are deprived of liberty, but they have all the rights of their stories, and they have stories of their own to tell. And it's wonderful.
Yeah, look, extraordinary. The bureaucratic process you must have to go through to make something like that work, I think is, well, I use the word astounding. I just think it's a great achievement. Now, Indira, your job is also at the interface of science and the community action that the foundation does. So tell me what role hard science, the scientists collecting data in the field, how are they? Well, is there much of it still going on at the moment in the Philippines? And then how does that information filter into the foundation and then out to all of your wardens and all of your staff in the centre, so that the most knowledge as possible is coming into everybody working hands on with the bird?
We believe that everything should be science driven, meaning evidence based. So we only can do that if we really do implement scientific studies, not only on the ecology and biology of the species we are working, but also working on the restoration efforts to help also in the habitat of for the habitat of the species we are working with. And with that science in our heads, it cannot just be done by members of our foundation. No, it's not that way how we work. We always engage community from the very start, meaning to say this citizen science thing, for example, the wardens, that's really citizen science. Yeah, that is really actual effective and proven citizen science, because it is real their work. And we have some volunteers already developed and really promoted on each of our project sites. I tell you about these volunteers, for example, that they are not given really a big amount, or not in some. When we started, there was really no amount at all, but now they are carried over part of the municipal funds. So what they do, for example, these are volunteers along the coasts of Nara, for example, that they count the birds every day which are crossing from the island to the mainland to forage, and then checking whether that number is equal to the number going back to the island from the mainland. And every day we do that. So when we had issues, development programs of the government, for example, to put up a coal-fired power plant just across our wildlife sanctuary where we started the Philippine Cockatoo Conservation Program, the community was the one fighting, because evidence the science of it, the numbers that there are indeed crossing and would be affected by that monstrous development is owned by them. The foundation, the data, they own the data because they were the ones collecting the data. So when we presented that, and they were the ones helping, not behind me, but in front of me, fighting against it for a very big project, I could only cry. You cannot do anything but really thank from your very bottom of your hearts how they have helped avoid this destructive development projects because they own the data. That's the science that we want. That it's not it's for decision makers to base on whatever is for that area. So we have had many struggles in the past, and because of this data, because of this science that we have, it has really reversed the decisions.
What about the ecology, biology, master's students, doctoral candidates, postdoctoral work coming out of the major universities in the Philippines? Are there many people doing projects on the Philippine cockatoo?
For the Philippine cockatoo, not so much, but the field of conservation biology in the Philippines is getting now in its peak. No, I mean there are now universities offering the course itself, and there are more. We have like a biodiversity conservation society here in the Philippines, of which I sit as a board member as well. So we are really encouraging so many young ones now. When we started back so many years ago, there are now many potential young researchers that we are offering scholarships and programs and internships to join in actual field works so that they get the feel of it. It's very difficult. Our problem really, Grant, is when finding people who are passionate enough that it's not about the salary, it's really about the fulfillment of the work. And this is difficult to develop in the university days. This has really to come from the very early years of your childhood. Yeah, that's the difficult part in the Philippines because, if you compare in the Western countries, the culture of zoos and museums are very far different from the Philippines. And the different educational system we have here is not so much developing critical thinking and really applications of all the concepts, environmental concepts, ecological concepts, to what could really be applied on field. No? So slowly these are changing, and we are happy, that we are able to influence because we are given the platform to talk about our project. We are given the platform to interact with the students. So slowly we are trying to change this, and we are happy about that. And there are also special bodies, Palawan, for example, that really engage the academe to become active partners in conservation.
Well, I'm sure that will grow as the Philippines develops. I think I mentioned to you earlier, I've been to the Philippines a few times, and I was always surprised at how little the people that I met in the provinces, spending a lot of time in really far-flung rural areas, the people just didn't really consider the birds around them. Quite different to hear that we have a sort of familiarity with what the birds are. And look, frankly, I think it is because there are different priorities for the life of somebody in the provinces in the Philippines. They don't have the luxury of the time to be whiling away the hours watching birds flying by. They've got other.
I agree. Grant, that whenever we start a conservation program, the question is, which one is important, the cockatoo or us? So why do you stop us from cutting trees? Why do you stop us from all these things? And it's very difficult to explain that, and it's very difficult to explain because they always connect it to the ecological function of a species or a biodiversity or a resource, right? So it's hard. And that's why our mantra, our slogan is always share a place to live. you are not the only being here that deserves to survive. And when you are protecting the Philippine cockatoo along with its habitat, eventually you are protecting your own because you are protecting the watersheds that support your water supply, that supports everything you need. So it's just a ripple effect. And then we just use the Philippine cockatoo being so charismatic. And of course, it's critically endangered. So they take that responsibility also because 90% of the global population is in Palawan. So the greater responsibility is in our hands. And hopefully in the future, we can bring it back to within its historical range, that we are able to bring back the Philippine cockatoo, and other Filipinos from oceanic Philippines could also enjoy the actual sight of Philippine cockatoo.
That's a brilliant and really wonderful aim to have. And it just highlights that you cannot separate the conservation, the biodiversity arguments in any of those situations from the economic imperatives of the people who will be affected by any of the work done. So I think it's phenomenal what you've been doing. Now we need to talk more about Indira. Now
Oh my.
you have been with a couple of awards. You got the Green Award, and you've also been recognised by the Senate of the Philippines for your work. So can you tell us about the Green Award? Because that was an international award, wasn't it?
You're doing your research, yeah? The Green Awards is like the Oscars of everything. It was like a crown on my head, yeah? So it was like, I felt like I was a queen at that time. Of course, I met the Royal Highness Princess Anne, and she was the one who really gave the award during the awarding. At that time, thanks, there was no COVID in 2017, that I was able to grace the actual awarding ceremony in United Kingdom. And yeah, so these are grassroots conservationists that they find all over the world. So at that time, I think there were like 180 plus choices, and it went down to 15 finalists, and then I was among the six really awardees and the only one in the Philippines at that time. So it was, well, it while it was putting some butterflies in my tummies and everything, the responsibility is also higher, no? And then, but the good thing about the Green Awards is it really put the level of the foundation, the Katala Foundation, into a higher leverage everything. So we were able to more speak to all the government agencies because this opened a very big for us to be welcomed by everyone. So it was the plus, of course, the Senate acknowledges the work we have done, and immediately upon arrival from UK, from England, they arranged everything that I would not go back immediately to Puerto Princesa, but instead drop by the Senate, for they have prepared already a signed resolution of acknowledging the efforts that we have done. And I don't credit that as my own, but for the team of the Katala Foundation, and especially the local partners we have. This cannot be done just by scientists or by a simple Indira, but by everyone part of the team. So that's the good side of it, that you are able to share the story of our partners, not about my story.
Now, I think that's a cracker that you went over and met Princess Anne, and good on Anne for being so interested in. Well, I mean that's one consistent thing of Charles and Anne, and that they really are conservation minded. No matter what else you think
Yeah.
of the royal family, they have been very consistent for a long time in supporting grassroots conservation movements, and good
And
on them.
if I may say something, I was really very impressed by Princess Anne because we are many, we are six awardees, and yet when she talks to you in person, she thinks she was very knowledgeable of what I am doing. She was very knowledgeable, and she even have a comparison of how it is in UK and everything. So there was really a light moment between her and me, and I was so impressed about that. I thought Royal Highness are really very very outside the world and they cannot be. But this was really a wake up moment for me that she was able to talk about our situation and how it compares with UK and everything. But the awarding, the only loss in the awarding is we were promised that Sir David Attenborough would be there.
Well. Look, maybe he'll be listening to the podcast sometime, and he'll know how much you were disappointed by Sir David not. I would be pretty sure that he would know quite a lot about the Philippine Cockatoo. I reckon he would know all about you.
I really look forward that I will meet him one day.
Let's do the lighthearted piece of the show. I'll just first let people know that if they do want to look up anything about Katala Foundation, the easiest website is philippinecockatoo.org, and that will take you right there. And there's a lot to read. I can tell you that. There's a lot to read. And the foundation has moved beyond projects for the cockatoo and is now, well, Indira, tell us what the other projects are before we start really drilling into you.
Oh my God. So, when you have success stories of the Philippine cockatoo, as I said, this is our pilot conservation program, then you can really apply it to other flagship species we have identified. So how the Katala Foundation works is that we choose a flagship species in need, and in most cases, critically endangered ones. And Palawan is biogeographically different from the oceanic Philippines. So there are many species that need help, no? So, for example, with the same strategies we have done for the Philippine cockatoo, we are doing it now for the Palawan forest. This is critically endangered Cibinurocala latensis, but obviously not found in Leyte, but only in Palawan. We are working on the Palawan, the one of the 8 pangolin species all over the world that is the most traded animal in the whole world, among mammals especially. So the Palawan pangolin, the Palawan forester. We have a project also on the 2 deer species of Palawan, the Calamian deer and the Balabac mouse deer, both from the both ends of very north and very south, very restricted home ranges and very restricted distribution in the province of Palawan in the Philippines. So we have also a project on the Palawan hornbill, the closest relative of the Sulu hornbill. So it's really, and what's very nice is that all these species needing also immediate conservation action, they share the habitat of the Philippine cockatoo. So when your approach is really ecosystemic, meaning habitat, and it's really the whole thing, not about species alone, conserving and the other species needing that help benefits from just one flagship species. But of course, the other strategies like all the capacity building, the wildlife wardens, which are also done in all these other programs we are implementing right now, are different also moves, not different intentions. So all these strategies from protected area establishment and management, from capacity building, from wildlife warden scheme, from scientific researches, all these are applied in all our other projects.
It's terrific. You're making a massive impact, and hopefully people will model what you're doing in other parts of the Philippines and indeed in other parts of Asia, where on-the-ground strategies can make a huge difference if you can get the local community on side and involved. Indira, you did mention to me that when you came to Melbourne, let's spill the beans. You're not only a wildlife nut and a birder, you're a tennis nut. So you came to Melbourne last year for the tennis and you went birding. Now, which is great. So that makes it easy for me to ask the first of the bird emergency questions for you. When you went birding, do you remember which field guide you were using?
I think we carried 3. I think we carried 3 in that time. We had even one just for parrots, and then we bought a new one. Oh my God!
I'm guessing you've the bird guide. That's the one you bought, isn't it?
Yeah, you're very bad. But it was really funny. I have to tell you that whenever we travel with my husband Peter, it's all his bird. So nice is that 2020, just before the outbreak of the COVID, that we were able to visit my sister, who's based in Melbourne, who's a structural engineer, and she's working in the government of Melbourne. And so we had free housing, and then we can go birding, and at the same time, I can go tennis watching.
Very good. Now, this is a question that I want to know the answer to, because for my next visit to the Philippines, I want to have the best field guide for the Philippines. What do you suggest that I buy?
Oh, there are new ones right now. Yeah. So we have the Birds of the Philippines with the big one, and we have also the old one, which is still reliable, the Kennedy one. And then we have an electronic Birds of the Philippines by, oh my God, which is the author now. And there are small ones also that are very handy, Birds of the Philippines by our friends Adrian Trinket Constantino and Rob Hutchinson. And yeah, I can lend you even the ones I have.
Well, I do want to buy something. I think I might invest in the electronic, in the app, if there's an English version, because I have no Filipino whatsoever. And you've actually got a couple of languages, native languages in the Philippines, so it's too hard to learn.
In English, so you really can Birds of the Philippines in English. It's very good. Yeah.
Okay, well, I thought we might have trouble with that question, but no, that is really good. So when you go out in the field, what's your favorite piece of equipment, or what do you rely on the most?
Apart from the binoculars?
Well, that's the answer then, isn't it? That's the answer.
Yeah, I think that's the answer. I cannot rely on anything. Of course, I'm not the bird identifier really, but I'm a bird spotter, I tell you. My husband finds it, I'm the ones who finds it. So that's the nerdy in me. Even if I am a very poor one who can describe exactly where it sits, but I can see it with my naked eye. And when I use my binoculars, then the more I can describe it.
Do you actively keep a list, or is that Peter who keeps the list?
Really? No, I must say. So he has a year list, he has a week list, and then we have together a year list. And we are doing eBird also. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yep.
eBirds every breakfast, every walk. But he is really with word list and year list and season list, and I don't know.
He's further up the bird nerd spectrum than you are, so there's no doubt about that.
Yes, there's no doubt about it.
And we've talked about Peter without really introducing him. Peter is a biologist of some note, some great repute in Asia. He's worked in the Philippines, of course, Indonesia. We were talking about Borneo or Kalimantan, Nepal, China, a great background in wildlife conservation. And I'm pretty sure that in coming episodes, one day down the track, we'll speak to Peter, which would be a delight. Now, this is usually a question that people find very easy. What is your favorite bird?
Yes, I knew that would be, of course, not including the Philippine Cockatoo, right? It should not be part. That shouldn't be part, because every time, even over 20 years already, I've worked with this species. Every time I see it flying in the wild, I still awed by it. I'm still loving it every moment. Whenever I see it fly, whenever I see it munch a seed or whatever food in the wild. So that is nothing in question. But next to that, my spark bird is a very simple stork-billed kingfisher.
Very nice, very nice. Now, you mentioned birds munching. When you get a moment, just look up the Hungry Parrots project, and you'll see Hungry Parrots. You'll probably like that. Where would you love to go?
Somewhere in South America. We've been to Brazil, and that was like 220 lifers for the whole trip for me. And I think there are many more in South America, like Colombia and Ecuador, that I want to visit, and also Costa Rica.
Marvelous.
Of course, Australia was part of it, but I was in West Australia, and I was there in Melbourne, so I'm very happy already of that.
That's great. Where was the highlight for birding in Australia?
Oh, I think this time I think for all my, I only had been in Australia for two times, and I like more the ones in West Australia when we were in Perth and then along there because we really drove. That's the perk of being a driver, of being the driver of a nerd birder, because then I really also have to enjoy the side. So that I really like that, and I have so many nice moment, not only on birds but also with other wildlife. Seeing the new roos and everything, and the oh wow, my God! So these are really memorable moments in my life. Australia. My God, it's just everywhere. I really cannot understand why there are so many and they are so close and not difficult to find. You don't have to sweat anything. We just walk from the house and go to the park. And the first, I had already 16 lifers, 16 different parrots. My God, Grant, how could you be so blessed?
Australia, land of critically endangered parrots. No
Yeah.
doubt about it. Fantastic.
Really.
Where is somewhere you would still really love to go birding? What's your bucket list bird adventure?
I want to see the birds of paradise in New Guinea, but it's so difficult. Maybe Peter was there in Halmahera and he was telling me maybe I wouldn't survive it. I wouldn't like it. So, but I really like when I see the feature, how they are mating, courting, and everything. This is super bucket list.
I think so. You're not on your own there. I think there's many people would love to see all of the birds of paradise that were particularly featured in David Attenborough's
Yes, yes.
series. So yeah, it's terrific. Well, Indira, we've come to the end. We've come to the end of you did survive. You had no need to be nervous. I just congratulate you. You said before when you were talking about the prisoners that you were the little lady in amongst all the big men. You're the little lady with the big voice and the big commitment. And I've had a great time sharing your efforts with the bird nerds of the world. And hopefully, many of them will choose to support the work that Katala Foundation and you and Peter, your team, the Warden, the persons deprived of liberty, undertaking in the Philippines on behalf of many of the critically endangered species there. Thanks so much for being part of the bird emergency.
Thank you very much, Grant, and thank you for letting me feel very comfortable. And thank you that I am able to share our little challenges and little successes as well, so that people would know that there is hope, yeah? In the midst of all this crisis and in the midst of the plunder all over of our ecosystems, there is hope if only we work together. So I hope we can share this and spread this news and share a place to live, as I always say.
Absolutely. I'm Grant Williams. This has been the Bird Emergency. Thanks for listening.